All right, now we're gonna have our first lecture on Japanese history. So for this lecture, we're gonna be talking about the early history of Japan. All right. If you have any questions, you can jump. You may jump in anytime. All right. So look at this map. This is what we call Japan, right? Uh, these are the islands on the rim, on the eastern rim of the East Asian continent. Okay, but if you zoom in, if you actually zoom out, you will see Japan's position in relation to the East Asian continent. Okay, this is the place we call East Asia or Far East, or part of Asia, right? Okay, so Japan is not a big country. Okay, actually, if the Japanese had not done the Meiji Restoration and industrialized and modernized their country, to for Japan to become a modern civilization, we probably would not have spent a whole semester to talk about Japan. So the importance of Japan really came from its successful modern transformation, uh, beginning from the 1860s. But before 1860s, okay, before the Meiji Restoration, Meiji Reform, Japan was there, but culturally Japan was heavily influenced by China, because China, for most part of the past 2,000 years, has been the center of the East Asian civilization. Okay, so you cannot talk about Japan, traditional Japan or pre-modern Japan, without talking about China, because there's really a lot of influences, cultural, political, economical, social influences on Japan from China. Yeah. So first, let's talk about the early population in Japan. So who are the early Japanese? Well, we know that Homo sapiens, that's us, right? Homo sapiens, humans, um, largely came from Africa. Okay, around 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens as a new species came into being in East Africa. Okay, so we all basically all our ancestors came from Africa. So starting from 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens started to colonize the entire uh, globe. So they first came out of Africa, in Middle East. They probably encountered some other early humans like Neanderthals, right? Um, and then some of the humans traveled all the way to Europe. Some of them traveled all the way to East. So after many years, the migration is very slow. No later than 60,000 years ago, Homo sapiens arrived in East Asia. The earliest human remains we found of Homo sapiens are from 60,000 years ago. So no later than that, Homo sapiens already arrived at this place that we call East Asia, this part of the continent, the eastern part of the Eurasia. Okay, um, so when Homo sapiens came over, they probably encountered some other early humans uh, Denisovas, right? Early, in the recent studies show that Homo sapiens actually probably interbred with other early humans everywhere they go. So in East Asia, Homo sapiens probably interbred with Denisovas and Homo erectus. This is very likely. And also, Homo sapiens picked up the biological traits along the migration journey. So they look like East Asian people today. Right? Um, Around 10,000 years ago, there was the last ice age. The last ice age was just fading away. During the ice age, a lot of water is in the form of ice. So the sea level is much lower during the ice age. So this allowed the Homo sapiens to travel to the islands near the continent. Okay, around 10,000 years ago, there was a land bridge between today's Japan and Korea. And Korea, uh, actually 14,000 years ago, today's Bering Strait the strait separating Eurasia and North America there was a land bridge there. Okay, we can call it the Bering Land Bridge because the sea level was much lower. So this is how Homo sapiens, no later than 14,000 years ago, traveled from Siberia to Canada. Okay, so really the Ice Age facilitated a lot of human migration. Well, for that same reason, through the land bridge between today's South Korea and Japan, the earliest Homo sapiens traveled to Japan through the land bridge here. But of course, when the Ice Age is over, the sea level is rising again, and then there was a strait here, Tsushima Strait. We call it the Tsushima Strait today. Okay, um, so so that's the early history. Uh, this slide show you some basic periodization of Japanese history. Periodization means that historians divide Japanese history into the several periods, okay, just for our own convenience. But keep in mind that all these so-called periods are modern invention, okay? The people who lived in the so-called Yayoi period, they have no idea about what Yayoi period is, okay? Because these periods are modern invention by modern historians. Historians do this for our own convenience, for our own uh, convenience of understanding history. It's arbitrary. Okay, all these periodizations are very arbitrary, right? All these terms we use in historical studies, like early Japan, medieval Japan, modern period. These are all modern inventions. The people who lived in the period we're talking about, they have no idea about these periodizations. Okay, uh, unless they live in the Nara period, right? This period is named after the capital city in Japan, right? In Nara city. So we call it so when the Japanese Empire had its capital in Nara, we call this period Nara period. So yeah, so the Nara period, the Japanese wouldn't know what Nara means because that's the name of their capital city, but they would not know that this period is named after that city. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the Jomon period. Okay, the Jomon period is roughly from 11,000 years ago to 300 BCE. Okay, BCE means before Common Era. It simply means before Jesus Christ. Okay, before Christ. BCE just means before Christ. 300 BCE. This period witnessed the earliest immigrations from the continent to the Japanese islands. Okay, why is it called a Jomon period? Okay, well, the reason is pretty simple. The reason is because archaeologists have discovered many pottery, okay, artifacts like this. And these are all pottery, okay? They are made of clay. And if you look at these pottery, you will find out there are rope imprints. Do you see that? The rope imprints on these pottery. Jomon in Japanese simply means rope imprints. It just means that, okay? So we basically found a lot of pottery from this period, and they all share one cultural characteristics, that is having rope imprints on them. So we call this period Jomon period because the people, the Homo sapiens living in during this period, they all produced similar pottery. They produced similar artifacts. So we use the artifacts they produce to name the time period. This is Jomon time period. Jomon period. The Jomon people, unfortunately, they did not leave any written records. Actually, the Japanese did not produce their own written records until much later, until the 7th century. So the Jomon people did not have a writing system, okay? But we know that they were hunter-gatherers. They were hunter-gatherers. They did not have agriculture either. They were not farmers, okay? They did not know how to farm. And they probably are nomads because most hunter-gatherers are nomads. Yeah, we know that they hunt deers, hunt other wild animals in the forests of Japan, and they fish. They fished a lot. Okay, so they ate a lot of fish. So one may say that the Japanese sushi was already invented during the Jomon period because they ate a lot of fish. How do we know that they were hunter-gatherers and fishermen? Well, because archaeologists have discovered a lot of a trash heap, a lot of trash piles left by the Jomon people. And by examining the trash they left, we know that they were hunter-gatherers and they did not have agriculture. So when you don't have agriculture, your population size is small because your population size pretty much depends on how much resources the local forest, local environment can provide. So you cannot have a large population. But the German people, that's how German people lived. Yeah, occasionally they would made they would make some potteries like this, and then 2,000 years later, archaeologists would have discovered these, but they did not leave us a lot of other cultural monuments. They didn't. Um, the there is a kind of people called Ainu people living in Hokkaido in northern Japan. Some scholars believe that the Ainu people they were probably related to the Jomon people, uh, who were the first wave of immigrants to the Japanese islands. Actually, Hokkaido, if you look at the Japanese the map, of Japan, Hokkaido was culturally, politically not part of Japan until late 19th century because it's really cold there, okay, and the environment is not good for agriculture. So there's the Ainu people. They lived in Hokkaido all the way until the 19th century without knowing that they were Japanese. They were just local hunter gatherers. Okay, um, yeah, but in the 1870s, the Japanese Empire, after Meiji Restoration, they conquered Hokkaido. So to a certain degree, Hokkaido can be considered as the first overseas colony of Japan. Well, but today we're only talking about so the Ainu people living in Hokkaido. What I'm saying is that the Ainu people they were probably related to the Jomon people. There are a lot of shared common cultural traits between the Jomon people and Ainu people. Okay, so that's Jomon people, hunter gatherers, and then around 300 BCE to 300 CE, CE means after Jesus Christ, we see a new wave of immigrants from the continent. Okay, and they brought over different culture. And this new wave of immigrants, they were farmers. Okay, they clearly know how to farm. So farming certainly, agriculture uh, made it possible for the civilization to develop in a much rapid speed. Okay, so that means that you not only become sedentary, that you settle in one village because you need to take care of your crops, right? So you cannot be nomads anymore. Okay, farmers cannot be nomads. So so-called Yayoi people, okay, Yayoi people, they are the farmer immigrants, the latecomers to Japan. Okay, Yayoi people, uh, they created pottery as well, like this. Okay, see the pottery on the right. Okay, very different from the earlier Jomon pottery because you don't see rope imprints anymore, so they're not Jomon people anymore. Okay, they also occasionally brought over some, or probably made some bronze utensils like this, bronze objects. These are bronze bells. Okay, you can also see bronze mirrors, bronze seals, other bronze tools. They probably brought those bronze utensils from the continent, or they probably made uh, these bronze utensils in Japan using the technology transmitted to Japan from the continent. So the source of the technology certainly is from the continent because Chinese, by the time when Yayoi people arrived in Japan, the Chinese in the continent have experienced the bronze civilization for more than 1,000 years. So the bronze making technology has been has has been very mature and fully developed in the continent. So the Yayoi people probably migrated to Japan from eastern part of the continent, most likely from Korea or today's Manchuria. Manchuria is this place in China. So Northeast Asia, we call this Northeast Asia. Some people also call it the Inner Asia, part of Inner Asia. Yeah. Okay, Yayoi people. Um, why they're called Yayoi? That's because of one of the archaeological sites related to the Yayoi culture is named Yayoi. So we just call the entire culture. We name the entire culture after the first place they were discovered. So that's Yayoi. Okay. Well, Yayoi people, they're farmers. So they're certainly culturally more advanced. So when Yayoi people migrated to Japan, certainly they give a lot of pressure to Jomon people. So we still don't know what happened because so there is no written records left from that time period. But what we do know is that from archaeological evidence, when Yayoi people colonized Japan, we see a disappearance of Jomon culture. So Jomon people basically disappeared in Honshu Island, in Shikoku Island, uh, unless there are only some hunter gatherers left in Hokkaido, but that's only because Yayoi people don't go there. Okay, right? And by the way, most of the stories about Japan happened in this big island called Honshu Island. Yeah, if you know Japanese language, Honshu simply means the the foundational or basic basic area. Okay, and then there are two other islands in the south, Kyushu and Shikoku. Okay, Shikoku, and then you have Hokkaido. You have Hokkaido in the north. Yeah, Hokkaido simply means the North Sea area. The Japanese call it North Sea area. It was not part of Japan until the 1870s when the Japanese Empire conquered that island. Okay. In the late 19th century, the Japanese Empire was pretty aggressive. They also conquered today's Okinawa. Well, it's not on this map. It's far in the south. Okinawa is this island between. Okay, actually, we can show you a bigger map. See, this is Japan, right? This is Taiwan, and Okinawa is here. It's in between Taiwan and Japan. Okinawa was conquered by Japan in the 1880s, about 10 years after Japan conquered Hokkaido. Again, the local people in Okinawa, they were not Japanese. They were traditionally called the Yukyu people. The Yukyu king. There was a Yukyu kingdom, independent kingdom in Yukyu. But in the 1880s, when Japan conquered Yukyu, Japan renamed it Okinawa. It's a Japanese name, and then Japanese uh, empire practice implemented a nationalistic Japanese education there. When World War II broke out, the local people in Okinawa they, 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 they were totally assimilated into Japanese nation. They thought they were Japanese, but actually, dozen decades ago, they were independent. They were an independent kingdom. Yeah, we know that in the 1940s, the Battle of Okinawa was pretty terrible. There were many movies about that, right? A lot of a local Okinawa residents committed suicide because they don't want to surrender to to American military force. But what's interesting is that only decades ago, the local people in Okinawa they did not even realize they were Japanese. So people's identity could change. We're going to talk about this when we move on to modern Japan. Yeah, people's identity always change, right? Yeah, you could consider yourself as a Japanese or a Hokkaido resident, or a Yukyu people or an Okinawa people. It depends on the political, cultural, social conditions. All right, so back to early history. Back to early history. Yayoi culture. Well, the early Yayoi culture did not leave us a lot of written records either. So we don't have the words written by the Japanese themselves until the 7th century. That's much later. Okay, but we do know that they left us a lot of uh, cultural monuments. By the way, this is probably the kind of houses Yayoi people built, right? Remember, they're farmers, so they have to be sedentary. That means they have to settle down in one village or one town. Okay, so they have to start building houses for themselves. That's kind of a primitive house. During this time period, we do have a lot of tombs left by the powerful people in the Yayoi culture. Yeah, we call these. So we call the period from 300 to 550 AD after Jesus Christ. We call this time period the Kofun period. Kofun simply means the ancient tomb period. This is one of the biggest one, as you can see from the picture. So although the Yayoi people did not leave us any written records, they're pretty smart. Okay, they're pretty smart, and they built a lot of cultural monuments and huge tombs like this. And those tombs are always um, built in the shape of a bronze bell. Remember the bronze bell we saw before, right? This is a bronze bell. Those ancient tombs are mostly in the shape of bronze bell. Okay, yeah. And around the Kofan or the ancient tombs, we also found these terracotta soldiers. These terracotta soldiers were buried near the tomb. So our guess is that these statues are probably made as some kind of a spiritual guard to protect the the ancient tombs. Actually, this is probably a tradition that Yayoi people brought to Japan from China, because the Chinese people in around 200, I'm sorry, around 2,200 years ago, they were the Chinese emperor, the first emperor of China, already built thousands or perhaps tens of thousands of terracotta soldiers, human-like, very realistic terracotta soldiers near his own home. So hundreds of years later, the Japanese rulers probably followed this continental tradition. They started building not only tombs but also terracotta soldiers to guard their tomb. But the Japanese terracotta soldiers are much smaller. Okay, the Chinese terracotta soldiers are much bigger. All right, so that's a Yayoi culture. Okay, and then during this time period, we know that their population were organized by clans. Okay, everybody belonged to a clan. There were aristocratic clans. These are called wuji. These are basically the nobility. But there are also commoners. Okay, these commoners are called ben. Okay, and then there were many states coming out during this time period. Uh, one of the biggest one of the biggest is called Yamatai Koku. Koku in Japanese simply means state. Koku, do you see that? Koku simply means state. Yamatai Koku means Yamatai state. And according to the Chinese sources, okay, remember the Japanese never left us any written records during this time period. We're talking about 200 to 300 AD. So the only written records we have about Japan were all from China. So if you want to study early Japanese history, you're gonna have to learn classical Chinese, okay? Because all the early uh, early historiography, early historical records about Japan were all written in classical Chinese, okay? So according to um, one Chinese text called Song Shu, we know that um, in the Yamatai Koku, there is a queen called a Himiko. Okay, a queen called a Himiko. Uh, so this country is ruled by a female queen, a female leader called a Himiko, but no one sees her according to the Chinese source. Okay, she is not only a queen but also a sort of female wizard or even like a witch. She has supernatural power. Okay, so this is why she's a leader. And she's surrounded by her male servants. Ordinary people, commoners cannot see her. Okay, but everybody knows that she has supernatural power. So this is a very mystical country, ruled by uh, this mystical queen called Himiko. Okay, the Chinese left us a story about that. How did the Chinese know about this? Well, the Chinese record is that in a certain year there were dwarfs. Okay, the Chinese call the Japanese dwarfs. They say they're dwarfs coming from the islands in the Eastern Sea, right? The Pacific Ocean, Chinese call the Pacific Ocean Eastern Sea. And they recorded that on a certain day, there are some dwarfs coming from the islands from Eastern Sea. And we call them dwarfs. Yeah, the Chinese call the Japanese a wa. You see that? This is the Chinese character for wa, for wa. It refers to the Japanese islands and Japanese people. Okay, the wa people means the Japanese. The Chinese say the dwarfs from Eastern Sea visited our empire and they brought us their local specialties. They paid a tribute and try to honor our emperor. The Chinese emperor is very happy, and then the Chinese emperor appointed the Japanese king as the king of dwarfs. The Chinese emperor appointed the Japanese king as the king of dwarfs. So this sounds like a joke, but you know what? Um, in modern time, we discovered the golden seal from China in Japan. The Japanese still kept this golden seal given by the Chinese emperor, and it says the Han Chinese emperor appoints uh, this king of dwarfs as king. It does say that. Yeah, I don't have a picture. I don't have a picture of that seal, but I probably can find that the next time for our next lecture. So that's basically all we know about early Yamatai Koku. But at the same time, there's also a Yamato nation or Yamato state mentioned by the Chinese sources at the time. Okay, later Japanese called their own nation Yamato. Yamato, yeah, actually this is the Chinese characters or the kanji. The Japanese call Chinese characters kanji. It literally just means a great harmony, state of great harmony. Yeah. So Yamato basically became the name the Japanese people gave to themselves. Yeah. For example, Kobe beef, right? Um, Anybody know the great basketball star called Kobe? Yeah, he's named after the Kobe beef. Yeah, and Kobe is one of the towns in Japan, and Kobe beef Kobe beef simply means Yamato or Japanese beef, because Kobe means this character. This Chinese character could have different pronunciation depending on the context. Okay, sometimes it's pronounced as Yamato, sometimes it's pronounced as Kobe, depending on the context. But it's the same. It's the same character. Okay, it's the same character, and that's the character Japanese refer to themselves. Okay, so Chinese accounts do mention the many states in Japan, and we know very little about early Japanese civilization. Okay, um, yeah, about the Kofun. Okay, well, you may ask the question, why don't we open up the tomes, the ancient tomes from this time period, right? Well, some of the tomes were open, but um, but most of them cannot be open. The reason is because today's Japanese imperial family, okay, the royal family in Japan, royal house in Japan, they believe they are the direct descendants of the owners of those ancient homes. So the Japanese imperial family would not let any archaeologists or scientists to open up those tombs, because they don't want anybody to disturb the spirits of their ancestors, if that makes sense, right? So this makes research kind of difficult, right? Because if we can do a DNA analysis of the human remains in those tombs, we probably can find out where the early Japanese, the Yayoi people, they're from. If we can do a DNA genetic comparison, we will probably find out early Japanese are probably from either Mongolia, Manchuria, or Korea, or China. We don't know. We don't know. But one thing for sure is that certainly the early Japanese population were all immigrants from the continent. Okay. Um, Religion. During this time period, the Japanese religion or popular religion bears resemblance with the popular religion in Manchuria and Inner Asia. The so-called kami, kami simply means the divine, the gods, the deities. Okay, um, the kami are worshipped everywhere. This is a tradition that lasts until today. Okay, in today's Japan, you still see a lot of shrines devoted to kami. Japanese call this a Shinto. Shinto means the way of gods. Shinto simply means the way of gods. This is a form of religion very different from Christianity. Okay, because Christianity is a monotheism. Monotheism means you only worship one God, and you don't worship any other gods. But monotheism is actually very special in world history. If you look at the history of a world religion, in most regions in the world, for most of the time, people believe multiple gods. Polytheism. Polytheism means you have a religion that accommodates or tolerates all kinds of gods, right? For Yayoi period Japanese, they worshipped, say, mountain gods, tree gods, river gods, right? Deer gods, tiger gods. Any natural phenomena could have a deity or spirit behind it. So all these are kami. Okay, all these are kami. Uh, so you have all kinds of shrines. If you go to Japan today, you will see that there are hundreds um, shrines in every town devoted to all kinds of gods. Okay, and you have to perform ritual, burn incense, pray to the gods, so that to maintain a amicable relations with the local gods, with the local deities. Yeah, this is a typical mono, a polytheistic religious belief. Okay, they don't believe in just one God. Um, the earliest historical records, written records we have produced in Japan are Nihon Shoki and Kojiki. Kojiki. This is Nihon Shoki. Nihon Shoki. Nihon. See, if you look at there are four characters, right? Four character Nihon Shoki. Okay, Nihon is the name that the Japanese in this time period. This is we were talking about, 7th century or perhaps early 8th century. In this time period, the Japanese started to call themselves their own land Japan. It simply means the foundation of the sun. Why would they call themselves the foundation of the sun? Well, if you look at the map of East Asia, Japan is to the east of the continent. So, in re- compared to the Chinese, okay, compared to the Chinese, the Japanese see the sun earlier, right? So, so for the continent, Japan is where the sun rises because Japan is in the east. If that makes sense, right? So this is why the Japanese call their own land the foundation of the sun. They do this very proudly, okay? Because compared to the continent, the people in the continent, they are they're closer to the sun every day, every morning. Their land is where the sun rises. So so that's how the name of Japan came from. Okay, yeah, actually, this is Nihon's. If you look at this character, it's a hieroglyphic character. It's a Chinese. It simply means the sun, right? Yeah, it represents the actual thing in the world. We call this kind of a writing system a hieroglyphic system. Okay, that's the Chinese language system. Shoki means records. Okay, so it basically means the chronicles or records of Japan. Okay, according to these early records, okay, these records were produced in 7th and 8th century, much later, right? Um, According to these early records, um, the creation of Japanese islands were the products of gods, of gods. So these are the myths of these are the origin myth of Japan. According to Nihon Shoki, there were two there were two gods, right? Izanami and Izanagi, one male, one female. The two gods, they basically they got married and then mated, uh, And then accidentally, the male god created some water drops or crystals from his spear. Okay, and then those water drops, when it dripped down to the earth, to the ocean, they became Japanese islands. So that's how Japanese islands were created. And then the two gods also produced early humans. So that's the myth. That's the mythology provided by Nihon Shoki, one of the earliest written records about Japan. So that's the story of the beginning of Japanese civilization.